Welcome to the James Bond Book Club. Hosted by me, John Bleasdale. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the James Bond Book Club. Today, we are talking about the 8th novel, the 9th book in the James Bond series, Thunderball by Ian Fleming et al. And to talk about it with me, we have a returning guest, Rob Palk.
Hello, I'm going to say this now. Mr. Bleasdale, I've been expecting you. I think someone had to say that during the course of these podcasts. Yeah, good to be back.
Welcome to my lair. I'm recording this from Switzerland. This is one of those novels which has a kind of backstory to its own composition. I think it speaks to Ian Fleming's endless desire to sort of try to make money out of James Bond and being frustrated by the fact that the books haven't quite reached the mass market success.
Well, the oddity of it is that knowing that it was written sort of collectively and intended to be a film, on rereading it for this, it feels in some ways the most personal and the most autobiographical. I may be wrong, but it's very much set within Bond's body in a way that speaks of Fleming's own sort of corporeal problems. It's the most odd for a film. And it's not got much imagery in it. I mean, it's quite a lot of it set underwater in a way that is quite difficult to film excitingly. So yeah, it's a strange book, but we'll get onto that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that point about the body and about the personal. I mean, because in a sense, this is the book that kind of, it's a little bit melodramatic, but you could kind of say it killed Fleming because the court cases and the stress that went with it meant that he had a heart attack during the court case, and then quite soon afterwards had a second one, and that was the end of that. So it's the actual concerns that begin the book, concerns about physical health, longevity. As you say, they're very close to Ian Fleming's heart, which I realise I've just made. I've just halfway through that sentence realised I'm making a pun that I didn't fully intend, but I'll accept it. I'll take that as read. I think this is also, in terms of the very beginning of the book, it's a very funny book and very sort of intentionally funny.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously they're all quite funny, but one isn't always sure that Fleming wants to be funny. But in this one, I think he's definitely taking the piss quite a lot. I'm taking the piss out of Bond, which is always fun. So it's. I mean, I especially like the slightly inconsistent version of Bond in this, where he's much more sort of malleable. He eats healthily for a few weeks and kind of almost becomes a Guardian reader. and starts thinking about doing social work and going on ban the bomb marches and stuff, which is very funny. And kind of sad he gives up on that idea quite early in the book. But it's full of sort of fears of mortality and kind of the battle with one's sort of failing frame, which is probably premature for a 35-year-old or whatever Bond is eternally supposed to be. But yeah, it fits well with Fleming's own sort of failing body, I guess. And it's oddly haunting in parts, actually. I liked it a lot more the second time I read it. I remember thinking it's a bit formulaic the first time, but no, it's got something, Thunderball, I think.
I think maybe that formulaic nature comes from the fact that it's transposed, again, probably because of Inception as a film, fairly faithfully in terms of the Connery version. Well, I say the Connery version. They're both, they're both Connery versions. But the first version feels pretty close to this. It's got some obvious deviations. And as ever with Bond, usually the deviations are actually more conservative than the novel. The novel feels... But in that beginning where M is kind of held up to ridicule here as well. It's like an old geezer who suddenly has his sort of bee in his bonnet about health. And what you said earlier about how Bond is perennially 35, it's kind of, I mean, I love the Patrick O'Brien book. And there's this thing of the Napoleonic War has to last about 40 years in order to have enough books to keep it in the background. And that is true of James Bond, that Fleming finds himself having to shift Bond's birthday because he would age out of the series. but he does age, and he does have battle scars, and he does have the sense that the body is beginning to fail as the series progresses.
I mean, one would not have to be very old for one's body to begin to fail if you had, say, a half a bottle of spirits and 60 fags a day, which Bond does. And this is kind of the first one that acknowledges that might be an issue, rather than actually helping Bond in his in his taking on the forces of evil. This one acknowledges that's going to have ill effects at some point, which feels significant because he has the sort of immortality in the other books, whereas this one, we get a sort of ailing Bond, which, it should be heartbreaking, but it isn't. It's quite funny. But
although it's kind of funny reading some of the contemporary reviews that came out as public, and one of them said, I think it was the Times, the reviewer said, "Oh, Bond is in a poor way because he's drinking half a bottle of whiskey a day, but that's not that much. He must not be eating properly." It's like he's probably not. He's probably doing it on an empty stomach, and that was half a bottle of whiskey.
I mean, the 60 cigarettes is certainly doesn't suggest that his many sort of sexual encounters are all that energetic. I mean, he is quite an ill guy in this one. I mean, they're going on with his sort of furry tongue and his general jadedness. But yeah, this is an excuse to get him to a health farm, which is kind of brilliant, really. I mean, it's the least Bondish place you can imagine. One thing I do like about the two films, that we'll probably get onto them later, I thought, is that for some reason, in the second film, Sean Connery, Bond, remembers going to the health farm the time before, but doesn't remember that exactly the same plot will occur there.
I don't remember. I didn't remember that. That's very funny.
He finishes M's sentence. He goes shrublands, implying that he's been sent there before.
Oh, maybe it's like M sends him there every few years. Like, not there again.
But he's not surprised or even confused by the sort of eternal recurrence that happens once he's there. A very similar plot with people with the same name is taking place.
Boomer from Alvida's Aim Pet has turned up.
I mean, his memory is probably gone with the intake and stuff. But yeah, we'll get onto the films later, I guess. But they are very odd, the sequel in particular. Though the fact that Connery is kind of visibly knackered in the second one does kind of fit with the theme of Thunderball, of him kind of slowly losing his powers, etc.
I mean, I think it's interesting the health farm is held up to some ridicule, but is also sort of seen as being effective. So, he does, tug at the bit a little bit. He's not, he doesn't want to be, he doesn't, but he also toes the line. He also accepts the discipline.
I mean, he sexually assaults someone, which is usually frowned upon in health farms, but otherwise he's pretty compliant, yeah.
Yeah, there's no way around that. There's no way getting around that. But, well, I'm not going to even, but I can't butt that, can I?
I mean, she gets, but yeah, it's possibly worse in the film, and then possibly again worse in the second film. But yeah, he is. I think he's misogynist in this one. He's crossed over into being a bit of a danger rather than exuberant. I sense Fleming condemning him a little bit for it. Actually, that might be wishful thinking.
I agree with you. I think Fleming has very ambiguous feelings to his main character, and I think he's frequently not endorsing him, even when later iterations have done.
This one in particular, I sense a real kind of almost hostility at times. I mean, we'll deal with it when we get to it, I guess. But there's he actually behaves like a complete scoundrel with Domino at one point.
Yeah,
much worse than I think in any of the other books, really. And I think more than once in this one just says bitch for no reason. Just almost appreciatively, but that's his sort of go-to phrase about any woman he encounters in this one. I think he's definitely a more jaded, dark Bond. But yeah, he does join in with the health regime, and it does, as I said, weirdly change him. He contemplates becoming a kind of herbivorous, liberal Bond, which is a shame he didn't really see that through for the rest of the book. But it was a good conceit.
The part in the health farm sort of stands alone in a way. It's its own sort of short story, and there's this disconnection from the rest of the book, which I think you have him sort of battling with Count Lippy as a childishness, really, sort of a one-upmanship of who can vandalize the health regime and create significant bodily harm more than the other.
Well, he dislikes him on the grounds that he's an overdressed, womanizing psychopath, which is very much kind of Caliban seeing himself in a glass. Really is.
The lady doth protest too much.
And immediately starts assessing his bloodline and lineage as soon as he runs into him. But
What's his racial make?
He does that a little bit less in this book, but yeah, does that with Count Lippy as soon as he meets him. Then, as we said, sexually assaults an osteopath and almost gets himself killed by having sort of childish rivalry with this count. So he's not really at his best. And I do enjoy the bit where he meets a Ted.
Oh yeah, by God, remind us about that. That's a wonderful moment.
Is he driving him?
That's right. He's giving him a lift, isn't he? And he sort of bonds. Oh, there I go again with my marvelous scintillating wordplay with the younger generation via knowing of motor cars, which again,
sex, knowing about prostitutes.
Oh yes, yeah. Which he sort of follows up on. He sort of has sex with the osteopath in the car.
Yeah, it's
which is kind of really not glamorous, is it? It sort of like says, "Oh, and then we had sex in her little sort of bubble car."
Well, there's bad continuity because Bond abandons the health farm's constraints and starts the things that motivate him to get back to normal as spaghetti bolognese, car-based sex, and vengeance. But then a couple of chapters later, he's back on the health thing and seems to have forgotten all that. So it's signs of hasty writing there, I think. But yeah, I mean, Bond does have a weird attitude to food anyway. So on that level, a health farm is a good place for him. I mean, he can sort of warp his already strongly ambiguous views on food into a new set of hang-ups.
I almost imagine him starting to sort of talk about the best kind of tea that he can, which is exactly what he does when he gets home. He's like,
I'm afraid he hates tea throughout. Remember, that's a very consistent Bond trait, is that he has strong opinions on tea.
No, but doesn't he towards the end of the health farm actually start to like tea a little bit? Isn't that?
True, but he does see that as a sign that his morale has been sapped and he's beaten. It's like he likes it in the way Winston Smith likes Big Brother. It's not conversion. His precious bodily fluids have been corrupted at that point. I like the as a slice of life thing, as well as the little glimpse into Ted life, and the fact that Bond starts off wanting to condemn him but eventually decides he's all right. I like that when Bond goes to tea shops, unless I'm misreading, it strongly suggests that they don't actually sell coffee. Ah, right. Okay. Yeah, that would probably be true in the future. I quite like the idea that you could go to a cafe and they just didn't have coffee unless it was specifically coffee-based cafe, which is you'd have to go to a London Italian milk bar to get a coffee. But leaning into my theory that Bond is a mod again. But yeah, he changes. He goes to tea shops which don't sell coffee. Even though it's a health farm, he's allowed to eat cake, I think, and kind of have lots of sugar in his tea. And does he still smoke? He has like one cigarette a day, I think, doesn't he? So it's not that healthy, really. Yeah, but I mean, in comparison to what he did before, remember the context in which this was received as half a bottle of whiskey, hardly worth mentioning. It doesn't really explain how he survives going off the booze, really, does it? I mean, you'd assume with his intake, because even the half a bottle of whiskey thing seems inaccurate if one has read the other books. Yes, yeah, he's done quite a few more, but like any drunk, he's constantly in denial, isn't he? I mean, there's the bit in Goldfinger where he decides to go on a proper binge and he sort of declares that he hasn't been properly drunk for ages, and you just think, well, what about yesterday? And he was like, he's not, no, that doesn't count. That's just mildly soused. He's quite high functioning, isn't he? I mean, there's very few scenes where you can tell he's drunk. He's not been sick on his recently. I think that's probably his own gauge of drunkenness. Although he's found a job where sort of impulsive, reckless, violent behaviour is sort of fine. So I love the way as well when he gets back to his house, it's his housekeeper, Scottish, Minnie the Minx character is Mrs. Tibbs from Blackadder. What is she actually called? I've read several of these books, so I can never remember what she's called. Mrs. Miggins or Mrs. I don't know. It's something along that. She changes her name in every book, actually. I'm not sure Fleming kept track of. She's appalled by him not eating cholesterol. Yeah, fried breakfast. That's no breakfast for a man. You need to at least have a sausage dipped in fried egg before you meet the day. In fairness, as as we know from the previous Bond book, the man is obsessed with breakfast. So if you'd had a daily lecture on the importance of fried eggs and scrambled eggs and bacon from a very hungover spy, and then suddenly they stopped, yeah, your world would cave in. It's the one thing she rely on.
And she actually mentions his spying in this. She actually sort of says, I know you're not going away. You know, you keep going away and you have blood, so you need a breakfast. It's all like, it's the two of linked, again showing what a terrible undercover agent Bond is, that his domestic servant knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, he is purely on his intake. One assumes he's not going to be that good at keeping secret.
This is also true.
Other than that, he might be too incoherent to actually give away much, but like people will be aware something's up.
Yeah, for your eyes only, and anyone who's in the pub where I live.
Just look at my notes. I see that his issue with tea is that it's time wasting, which I approve of. He has to be continually in motion, and tea is too sort of static a drink.
You have to wait for it to brew, so that's wasted minutes right there.
Coffee has a bit of impetus to it, doesn't it? It kind of gets you. It has a function. You're going forward with coffee, whereas tea is too contemplative for Bond. I think it involves.
It's in the language, espresso and instant. Yeah, it's right there in the name.
But it's also a lovely little insight that coffee might have been considered quite glamorous by the readership.
Yeah, and continental.
Yeah, well, very sort of, again, mod. But yes, so anyway, I love the health farm sequence, really, apart from the sexual assault. I think it's a nice little book in itself, and it's almost a shame when it ends, which possibly my original issue with Thunderball was that I wanted Bond to stay in the health farm for longer. But on a second read, again, I actually really rated it, and we come on to Spectre coming in, and it's a pretty solid scene, I think. Spectre.
Nice bit of casual anti-Semitism when describes the streets and which is the rich street, which is the most sort of nouveau riche. It's not the wealthiest street, but it is the sort of most important. Fleming said something about the surnames. Too many Steins in that.
Now I do want to defend him, because having in our last meeting pointed out that the Gulf thing I think was rather iffy.
Yeah.
I think Fleming is ventriloquizing a common posh people's view there, right, rather than necessarily endorsing it.
Right. Okay.
Maybe because he's talking about fairly evil people, and I think he's saying that that the blue bloods of Paris are fairly anti-Semitic, which we've all read Proust. They are, so I think that's okay. I'll give Fleming a pass on that, if not the most of the rest of the racism. But in that case, I think maybe. So I'm on the
Rob Palk, racism pass given.
It's one of his least racist books, I would say, Thunderball.
The bar is where the bar is.
It's still very racist.
Of course it is. Let's get on with Spectre. Have
you read the non-racist Bond books that they brought out last year?
This is an interesting point, because I haven't. I was thinking about this, but because I'm so in love with those the original second printings or first printings, so they're as racist as the day they were born.
I suspect the non-racist ones will be really quick to read.
The end.
Publish it on a stamp. I mean, Thunderball is probably one of the ones that he'd keep quite a lot of. But yeah, I don't know how you could do Live and Let Die unracistly.
Yeah, it's kind of in the DNA. And I mean, I would argue, and the episode I did with Live and Let Die, we do argue that there's a lot of race in there, but that's not, and we can argue about definitely Fleming is not a non-race, but it's kind of interesting how the races work. I've just finished reading Faulkner, Absalom, and it's just page end to end N-word all the way through. And
it's a book to read on the tube.
Yeah, it's really, and I mean, I have problems with Faulkner that have nothing to do with the racism and the setting and the Deep South and all those things.
It's quite boring.
It's that he doesn't use paragraphs. But yeah, it essentially comes down to there are good books in there, but I think maybe the whiskey led to him not editing as well as
Century, which is one of his more conventional ones, is actually cracking and a really good read.
Yeah,
but yeah, the sort of high modernist one, they're hard work, aren't they? Really, for
yeah, it's high modernism and racism. I mean, I don't think Absalom is the highest of them, but it just has a thing of like, for God's sake, man, stop repeating yourself and use some paragraphs. Cut out the repetition. Don't have everybody talk the same.
Be more like Fleming, I think. Keep the racism by all means, but yeah.
But let's whiz through it. Well, so to return to Fleming, I definitely see he's just such an interesting character because he's using so much. It's the same thing with women. They have these. He has these characters who Bond treats in a certain, but they are often characters who are very active. Actually, often turn the tables on Bond. Or I mean, this one is a really good example of the female character, the damsel in distress, actually saves Bond's life and is the main, and in many ways is far more active a character than Bond is.
Well, my sort of theory of Thunderball, apart from it being a kind of hymn of the body, is that on some level although he doesn't quite commit to the Bond goes Guardian reader, Bond goes woke theme, he sort of does, because the ending, which we'll get to, I guess, does sort of turn the tables on some of Bond's, I think, in terms of saving him and so on and so forth.
What did you think of Blofeld?
It's not an auspicious entry, is it?
It's actually quite close to Spectre, the Daniel Craig.
He doesn't have a cat.
No.
Which is noticeable. And he's not really in it much. I don't know if Fleming intended to do stuff with him later. It's, again, oddly unfilmic to set up a big villain and just give him a scene. It doesn't seem terribly well structured for a film. But he comes on, he has a cruel mouth, much as Bond does. There's a lot of cruelty around the lips in the Bond books.
What is a cruel mouth?
I don't know, I sort of picture Clark Gable when they say that, but... Yeah. I mean, I think we're supposed to think it's quite hot.
That's like a moustache more than a mouth, though, isn't it?
Yeah. We're supposed to think Bond's mouth is very attractive and yet cruel. So I assume it doesn't mean cruel in a kind of like spiteful, thin-lipped, kind of grudgeful way. It must be a sexualized sneer of some sort. Maybe Elvis-like, but...
okay, sort of pouty.
Yeah, but he's supposed to look like Hoagie Carmichael, isn't he? And he doesn't... I didn't detect any real sadism around the chops in photos of him, but maybe it's just Fleming's go-to mouth description is that it's cruel, and he's asexual and a non-smoker, which we're obviously conditioned to distrust in Bond world. I kind of like the Spectre scene though. Dialogue aside, it does, because the dialogue is much the same as in Goldfinger, isn't it? It's the kind of cartoon bad guys chat,
exposition dump.
The setting feels oddly authentic, quite exciting, and sort of semi-plausible as villain. And I like the shift. I think Fleming had given up on politics altogether by now, hadn't he? So it's I don't know if there's a motive other than indifference towards him deciding to ditch the Soviets as the main baddie.
I think it was just that the Soviets were no longer seen as that much of a threat. I mean, this is pre-Cuba missile. And so there's a sense of there's a warming in relations. There's not, the Berlin airlift and all that sort of stuff hasn't happened yet. All that sort of standoff occurred, and so there's a sense of things are going to warm up a little bit. I mean, he makes the point that Spectre is made up partially of a bunch of ex-Smersh people, so he hasn't quite given up. But they've gone corporate, and I kind of like that idea that it's a sort of globalized capitalist corporation now, rather than a, and it also allows him to be racist to everybody, cosmopolitan racism. Yeah, I can get to the Toms and I can get to the map. I can cover everybody. Apparently, Britain doesn't have any organized crime gangs, luckily.
I mean, ours would have been quite piffling at the time, wouldn't they?
Yeah, the Krays were still little kids at this point.
I mean, you couldn't take like British gangsters that serious context, I don't think. I mean, you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of them, but I don't know how particularly efficient they would be in holding the world to ransom way, I think. Although, I suppose, as we've learned, Spectre aren't really that efficient, are we? Despite Blofeld's best efforts, they're pretty shoddy. But yeah, he brings on Blofeld, then decides not to bother with him. I don't know if he had it in mind that Blofeld was going to return, or indeed if Blofeld eventually gets a cat in the books. I've not read far enough to know. But and there's a good killing one of the baddies.
Yeah, he uses that management style of, I'm going to be angry with you, but it's really you that I'm going to kill.
I mean, he's sort of done that before a bit with Goldfinger, I think. But yeah, it's better this one. It feels a bit more plausible. And the baddies themselves are a little bit less sort of Dick Tracy-esque and Batman-esque. they have a plausibly corporate veneer, and it's a good idea. I think he doesn't really do much with it in this book, but it's obviously it kind of chimed with him enough for him to return to it, which I'm looking forward to. I've not yet read the other Spectre.
Yeah, I mean they turn up in a few of the later ones going forward, taking over from Smersh. So it sort of divides the novels up into the first ones are very Smershy and Smershy or him just on adventure stories rather than any spying. And then the second ones where the villains tend to be in some way connected to a Spectre. And a Spectre is also a name that he's used in the past. He uses it in Diamonds Are Forever, the Spectreville as the sort of town, and he uses it as a name of the machine that they're trying to get in From Russia with Love. So it's the sort of MacGuffin in True with Love is a Spectre sort of code-breaking machine.
Well, I think we know this, don't we, because of the court case.
Yes.
It was just whether or not Fleming had actually invented Spectre.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. With Kevin McClory and a whole bunch of other people.
It's a very good backstory to the whole thing. But yeah, so Spectre appear. We don't quite get Blofeld in his full glory, but it's a nice little portent of what will come. And they've got some bollocks scheme like in all the books, haven't they? They're going to steal some bombs or something. It doesn't really matter, does it? I suppose it's
Well, this is the first one which is really high stakes because, well, I mean, Moonraker, he's already actually allowed an atomic bomb to explode in the Channel, and they've just written it off as it's just a very big bomb. Don't worry.
This one, again, fitting with Bond's, conversion to Guardian readership, does have a little bit of anti-nuke sentiment in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think there's a kind of general assumption that as long as they don't get pinched, the British are okay to have.
Yeah, but I mean, there's definitely a sense that everybody's saying, well, it was only a matter of time. That it's only a matter of time someone pinched.
I slightly wondered if the lack of the Soviets as baddies was because he was hoping to kind of sell translation doing the Thor, but I've nothing to back that up. But yeah, this is a more left-wing Bond in some ways.
So basically we get the blackmails because we have quite. I really like the scene where the Italian pilot kills the crew of the.
That is a genuinely good scene.
Yeah, it's a really exciting piece of writing.
And you kind of have sympathy for the guy, even though he's behaving despicably and plunging the world into the end times. But you kind of like him.
Yeah, he wants a nice car, and he's seen cars, and he's picked out a model that he likes, and he's thought up a line for when he arrives to say to the Spectre people that he's. I can't remember what the line is, but he's actually thought of a line to sort of arrive and say, "Here I am."
The books do hammer home, though, we are not so different, you and I, stuff a lot less than the films. But at the same time, this is a man who cares a lot about thrills and sex and more or less does what he's told for whoever will pay him. So he's only slightly more unscrupulous Bond, really, a kindred spirit. So we switch our sympathies quite easily to him, I think, and are slightly taken aback and sad when he's instantly off as soon as he arrives at the.
Yeah, and a really nasty piece of violence as well. I mean, he's stabbed through under the chin in a way that made me wince as I read it.
It's a really good standalone chapter, and actually quite thrillerish in a way that, I mean, I know they are all technically thrillers, but there's sometimes thrillers on a sort of legal comics level, aren't they? Whereas this feels genuinely quite Hitchcockian, and indeed references North by Northwest. I think perhaps hinting how Fleming kind of hoped the adaptations would go.
Yeah, he does have a way of name dropping people that he wants to be involved. He mentions. You've already mentioned Hoagie Carmichael. In another book, he mentions David Niven, and there's a real sense that he's lining people up that he hopes will read the book and go, "Oh yeah, I wouldn't mind."
I mean, he backed Kennedy.
Yeah,
pretty impressive, although sort of terrifying for the Western world that this was the mindset of the leader that he really got on with the Bond books. But yeah, that's pretty good going.
This was his bedside reading.
And I mean, I suppose if you're Kennedy, it's probably quite close to how you live your life, isn't it? It's realism.
Yeah, I don't think Kennedy would read any of these and go, "Oh, that's not how you treat a lady."
Or even that's far-fetched. I mean, if your day-to-day life involves constant womanizing and taking the world to the brink of nuclear war, then yeah, Bond books are perfectly realistic stuff, really, on the kitchen sink.
We are not so different, you and I, Kennedy would say to everybody in the book.
But luckily, the main good thing about killing aircraft staff and stealing nuclear bombs and so on is that it gets Bond off the health food for a bit, and he orders Mrs. Mickens to make him scrambled eggs.
Excellent.
That he's back and he gets back on the fags. And does he have a drink as well? I suspect he has a drink. And the real Bond returns. The
she pours a whiskey into the scrambled eggs.
It's like, so Bond is resolutely back on killing himself for all our benefits.
If that was made today as a straight third version of the book, I would have Edgar Wright do it and have one of those quick montages of him making scrambled eggs and lighting a cigarette, drinking a whiskey, and then being ready.
I really want them to do a much more based film at some point. They don't address the eggs at all, as far as I know, and it's misses so much of the character. It's 9/10 of what he's about is egg consumption. It's
there's a huge egg-shaped hole in all the films.
There is. The world is not an Earth, as I.
Oh, wonderful.
That's the only egg-based Bond pun I can think of, I'm afraid, but I'm sure there's many more.
But, yolk finger.
Anyway, Bond. So the Kingsley Amis section of the book, which is about Bond's alcoholism, sort of ends at this point. He's back on the scrambled eggs like a real Englishman, and he's ready to save the world. And the next thing we know, he's in wherever the hell he goes.
The Bahamas.
The Bahamas.
He goes to the Bahamas because basically he's received some criticism about always going to Jamaica. So he decides, okay, where can I go that's like Jamaica but not Jamaica? And he heads for the Bahamas and does a bit of travel writing on the the various places he can sample and he can have an experience. And this is where the book is very strange, because it puts him, instead of being on a sole mission, he's kind of one part of a global mission, and he's just like off doing a sort of side thing, which he has no real confidence will have anything to do with actually capturing the bombs. He's just part of a network.
Well, he doesn't let the likelihood of impending mass slaughter and possible world-ending global conflict prevent him chasing Skirt, does he? He gets straight in there with Domino. But yeah, it's all a bit vague. It's a stab in the dark. He doesn't really isn't being kidnapped or beaten up or anything at the start. So he's just there trying to seduce Domino.
There's this huge 5 or 6 page section, which is just Domino talking about a packet of cigarettes, players' cigarettes.
It's glorious.
I know, but it's again, it feels like it's a short story that he's dropped in the middle of the book. And I wonder as a newspaper man if it's just almost like his advertising copy. He's thinking, this will get me a lifetime players' cigarettes.
I think it's more likely that Fleming was at least considering giving up smoking at the time of writing it. The book dwells on cigarettes with almost eroticism. It is all about cigarettes. And
it's the most cigarette-y Bond book ever.
He's gone back to being a health freak by the time he gets to the Bahamas as well. He's sort of advising her on how to give up smoking and stuff, and still has this kind of macrobiotic tinge to some of his opinions that he more or less forgets about after a while. But yeah, it's a lovely little scene about her reveries about the man on the fag packet. It's quite nice, and I find her slightly more convincing than the average Bond woman.
Absolutely. And because she's full of imagination and life, and she's full of, I think it's a failing of the book that her being with Largo has nothing to do with her brother being pilot of the kidnapped plane, of the hijacked plane. It's just that she happens to be with him as well. There's a little bit. It's a bit of a weird coincidence that they're. Yeah. It's not like he's been threatened with her life. We've got your sister, so do what we say. It's like, no, we're going to give you a nice car. It's got nothing to do with your sister.
Yeah, they could have perhaps had it that he introduced them or something. But again, that would spoil the idea that Spectre is so kind of watertight. Then lots of the book does spoil that, in that he's doing this incredibly risky and very illegal mission, but is allowed to bring his girlfriend along.
And everybody goes on jollies. It's like a school trip. They go out to the casino every night.
Yeah,
pretend to have fun, And it's just like, well, hang on a minute. If you're gonna, if you're in the middle of this hugely risky global crime operation, perhaps stay on the boat.
I mean, I assume they thought, well, this is going to be the film. Fleming can do casinos. Bond does casinos. We're going to have him go to a casino, but it doesn't really fit in, does it, at all?
No.
And Bond's technique of repeatedly saying, "Oh, has anyone seen a Spectre around?"
Spectre, 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 Spectre!
Spectre will be along soon. It's a shit technique and really risky. Like he very likely to just get the shit kicked out of him, I would thought.
Oh, I don't know. I had a lot of respect for it.
Well, Domino does. Domino's really impressed and instantly decides that Bond's the man for her. But that's the only implausible thing about Domino, really. Although,
we have Felix Leiter turning up as well, which I think
always nice.
Is what he actually has a fairly big part in, and I love the way his shark injuries seem to have been getting less and less serious as the series goes on. It's like he's still got a hook, but I thought he'd lost an arm and a leg and
I think he died, didn't he?
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to mention any of that as we go forward.
I mean, well, clearly Bond is used to his presence, doesn't feel a need to
it's about inclusivity. He's
Bond doesn't see the disability; he sees his friends. However, it doesn't really explain why all the baddies don't notice it.
And the one bit that he brings it up where he says he's found a way of screwing a fin to his hand so that he can swim better does leave you with an image that you'd rather not have in your head.
He also suggests that he uses it for copping off. Admirably inclusive, I suppose, but also I don't know. Like I don't want to. I am myself disabled. I'm not hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but even if I did not know that a one-time secret agent had horrific shark injuries and be alert to people who seem to have those injuries, I would perhaps notice and be a little taken aback if someone turned up with his lawyer missing most of his body and with a hook. I would wonder what was going on there a little bit, and it doesn't fit in with the character of Bond as just your average Joe millionaire and his reliable, trustworthy lawyer. If he's only got like half a face and various bits missing,
and especially sort of in the Bahamas with a sort of with the obvious links to piracy which are mentioned throughout, and a treasure hunt. People quite insensitively talking to the man with the hook about a treasure hunt.
I mean, Leiter, bless him, doesn't seem to notice that or take offense or anything.
Yeah, and also the other thing is that the CIA seem to have him on the list of people to call whenever they need jobs doing. It's just like, okay,
we'll get the seriously traumatized guy with most of his body missing. Call him back.
He's just. He's doing it. He's working for Pinkertons, but we've still got his number, haven't we?
I mean, not enough. Bond is not really good at blending in, what with the tux and all, but at least he's more or less got a number of limbs.
Yeah, Leiter. The one thing about Leiter is he's, despite being eaten by a shark, he's not actually traumatized. He's actually sort of the jolliest guy you could ever hope to meet.
From, as with most of the characters in this book, on the issue of the stomach.
Right.
He does like a 3-page rant about the quality of hotel food and the terribleness of waiters.
That's true. True.
Humiliates a waiter in a really quite unpleasant way.
What? Oh, remind me.
He kind of takes this guy aside, and we are told that the man's face went from resentment to fear to respect as he explains the exact way to kind of serve a drink or something, and then goes into a huge rant about the inadequacy of hotel food and the sharks that run. I think he actually said shark.
That should ring alarm bells.
I'm not going to check that, but I think he says sharks that run the hotel industry. And Bond is fully on side with this rage against food.
Sharks doesn't have any sort of triggering effect the way Spectre does, apparently.
Also, they've given him the name Larkin, which I'm intrigued by.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Could that be? Could it be?
Philip Larkin be lurking?
Yeah, I don't. Do you think Larkin passed on to Fleming's radar at all? Or?
Ah, that's a good point. I don't know. A library in Hull doesn't strike me as a place that Fleming would ever.
I don't know how
Uh,
famous Larkin was at this. What
yeah,
he would have had some sort of coverage in the arts pages and stuff, but whether or not he'd be on the
on the radar.
yeah, I mean, we know the reverse would be the case. I'm sure that Larkin was a big Bond fan, but
Well, Amis definitely was. So you imagine that he would know about.
it might be
And
to Poplar.
yeah.
A similarly problematic figure from commercial fiction of the era.
Yes, exactly. So we get the dominoes and the dominoes fall, and this is the moment that we were referring to, I think, earlier on. Also, I mean, Bond does this thing again and again all the way throughout the books, where he follows the clues to exactly the right conclusion, which he then doesn't want to face for 3 chapters, as he insists. It's probably just. I'm not going to bother anybody with my sort of highly obvious and probable theory, rather than I'm not
in
going to.
this case, it's because he wants to avoid red tape, though, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, MI5 during a nuclear crisis wouldn't normally check on the guy they'd send out to deal with it.
Yeah, well, they ask him to. You have to report every hour on the hour, which does strike me as a bit dumb. How far away can you get into the Bahamas in an hour that have to get back 30 minutes later to.
It's a bit much, but they don't check on him once.
This is true. There is a reference to them being angry with.
Oh, actually, yeah, I think he does report something or other, doesn't he? But more or less that he's just spotted that there's quite an attractive woman there, I think. That's about it, really. I don't think he more or less by chance, based on the clues he's given. We know it's obvious, but I can see why Bond would not want conclusions straight away. So I'm with Bond.
Okay, I'm not. I think he's not a great viewer of facts, and he's definitely not a good detective. There's no sense of him putting together a story and making it. It's always him sort of being forced to confront what the reader has already guessed 3 or 4 chapters previous.
Well, he always says, "I'm a sort of policeman rather than a sort of detective."
Yeah,
which
that's true.
Brute force and a truncheon and flat feet are more important than his brain. So he goes diving after
there's a lot of diving in this, and there's a lot of underwater scenery.
Now the problem with underwater is I think again it's quite boring, isn't it, going underwater? I mean, I'm sure it's great if you do it.
I think the Barracuda scene is
that the first trip underwater?
It's the one where he meets the sentry and the Barracuda eats the sentry instead of and I think that's quite
diminishing returns after he's described quite well what it's like underwater and have an adventure there, to keep going back there. Again, very unfilmic. I mean, Thunderball is, I think, the weakest of the kind of classic era Bond, and in terms of the film, which is odd as it's the only one that was intended to be a film. It's a bad decision to kill underwater. I mean, I don't know if you've tackled the short stories yet, but one of the short stories is the Hildebrand Rarity.
Yes.
Is set on a boat and does sort of aquatic Bond slightly better than the sea bits of this, I think.
Yeah, there's a few that the Hildebrand Rarity. There's I think Octopus is set.
I assume there's some nautical element to Octopus.
Yeah, I hope so, rather than somebody with AIDS. Anyway, the one bit that's really striking in this, and I think we've referred to it already, is how he knows Domino's brother has died and has sex with her anyway, and then tells her afterwards.
Genuinely shitty behaviour.
Yeah, and he knows it's shitty. That's the weird thing, is he's sort of like, I shouldn't be.
It's the worst thing I can think of that he does in the books, actually. Yeah. Like, despite his I mean, he puts it about a bit, doesn't he? That's not
quite as much as he does in the movies. I mean, he's much more of a vulnerable.
Not as much as Roger Moore.
Even in this, he sort of says, "I love you," quite quick.
Although he does say that quite a lot.
This is true.
In a way that suggests the target of Bond's love doesn't have to be a static thing. It could be he has love that he places in a lot of places. But yeah, that's really shitty behaviour. I don't think he wouldn't have done that to Vesper or pussy. He would. It's his lowest point, I think, because there's no reason other than that he wants to have sex with her.
And it's more hard hitting as well because you feel that she's actually a character.
And she's pretty plausibly hurt, although she then goes along with the scheme quickly after. But it's that's the first point, caveat apart from where I really disapprove of Bond.
And do you think Fleming does as well?
Bit. He doesn't quite follow it through in terms of having Bond reflect on it or anything, because that really wouldn't be Bond if he was reflecting on it that much. But I think we're supposed to think, oh, that was a bit. And also sort of needless.
Yeah, because he could have just not had sex with her and just told her.
Sex with her. He could have told her, and then, if he absolutely had to have sex with her, suggest it at another.
Yeah, after a cooling off period, perhaps, if they both go to like separate corners, or have a think.
After you've saved the world, maybe.
And I mean, there are books in which he doesn't have sex with the main girl. Moonraker is one where he's blocked by her having a boyfriend that he doesn't know about. So.
Doesn't he get tied to her for quite a long time, though?
Yeah, but that's not the same thing, Rob.
No, I know, but it's.
That doesn't.
It's in a grey area, isn't it? If you.
I've got a flashback to Robin Thicke's blurred lines.
if one is tied to someone inside a rocket or the side of a rocket, I can't remember. Yeah, and
the launch pad of the exhaust tunnel.
It's a form of intimacy, if not necessarily sexual. It's they're close.
Sure, yes, but still not. It's not. Look, let's say I've got eggs in the fridge, but they're not scrambled eggs.
Yeah. Which I'm
trying to put this in a language you understand.
I've been noting the egg consumption, and Bond chooses to have egg and bacon and I think 2 martinis before going diving.
Which is everything your mother said you shouldn't do.
I mean, it doesn't hinder him, and who knows, if he wasn't on the egg and bacon, he might die. We don't know what will happen. But yeah, then we have the bizarre casino scene. It's a little bit needless. Very badly done in the second Thunderball film. But should we give that a section later on?
We can do. And we have a let's go to the sort of conclusion, because they have help from the Americans. I mean, the Americans have a big role in this. They have a nuclear submarine. You have Geiger counters. Bond is very sort of grateful. Says he has no problem with the Americans helping out, and of course Felix Leiter is his friend. But then it's Bond who kind of saves the day with underwater fighting skills. But then it's Domino who saves Bond with her resistance to torture. Usually it's Bond getting tortured, and now it's Domino getting. I'm
very excited about her getting to be in that.
Yes. You can tell he wrote a whole chapter that he decided to leave out, because he enjoyed writing it.
There's a detectable smell off the prose in that bit.
But
it goes from that to this sort of weird bit on the submarine where they're hanging out with the other soldiers, and it has a slight feel of those old sort of schoolboy stories where a kid is allowed to go on a submarine or fights in a war for some reason. Bond seems very much a small boy in this thing, and they let him play with the submarine bits.
There's a brilliant bit where the captain says, "I'll go through first in case you back your head."
And in all honesty, I my issues with the book, I think, are largely because the second fighting in the water bit with Domino and stuff, I very much lose track on 2 readings of what the hell is going on in that bit. It becomes a little bit unclear, and I think it's not just me, as to what their game is and whether they're currently underwater or suddenly above water, or it becomes quite hard to picture, and I'm not sure whoever actually wrote that bit is picturing it very well as well.
Do you know what I think the problem might be? Is that they don't obviously have a button to press, a clock. It's just they're delivering the bombs to a place that they're then going to go away from. And
it's just, I don't know, a lot of it could be done another way. There isn't that sense of there's only one way we can deal with this. They could wait a bit and try and get them at the other end. There's no sort of real like you said, a clock ticking. Nothing's about to happen really. They're just sort of drifting around under the water.
And once the nuclear submarine has sort of caught up with them, well, they've got them now, haven't they? I mean, everything, it's all over bar the shouting.
And he's not that terrifying a baddie. Like, the main baddie is only in it for a chapter, really. This is some guy.
Yeah,
we don't like, but
He's a guy who, like every single villain that Bond meets, is not very good at losing. That's the
So,
one
like,
thing.
was that
That's the
you cut
one
off a
thing
bit?
he can't bear.
Well, the thing is, with I know you said there's a lot more at stake in this novel, some of the others. I mean, more so than the early ones where it's like someone's cheating at cards or whatever. And then this one, but ultimately, he is only going to like blow up Miami.
I mean, who'd miss?
There isn't. I mean, it's pre-Cuban Missile business.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know if Miami was quite the same then, but at the same time, it's what Disney World was there. Was Disney World even there at that point, or is it there? I'm not sure, but it was a retirement village, really, wasn't it?
Well, they sort of say at one point that they're gonna that even the first one that's gonna blow up, which will be a missile site, would there's 8,000 people in a nearby hotel, and that would cause mass deaths. So I mean, he's talking about thousands of people rather than tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands as you would these days.
I just sort of feel it's an ill-chosen place because I don't think. Well, we don't go there for a start. If we had a scene where he's in Miami and thinking these people are all going to get blown up, one might feel it a bit more, perhaps. But there isn't really a set of cultural associations like there is with say New York for the typical reader. I don't think for Miami. Well, it's the place. So yeah, we're not really that bothered if he blows up Miami.
No,
If we are, it is because we don't want Bond to get told off.
but let's talk about the films. Let's because you've seen them recently. I've seen them in the past. I saw Never Say Never Again cinema.
Oh
So
wow,
yeah, yeah. So old am I?
well, that's a long time ago. Sorry.
Yeah. No, no, thank you. I saw both Octopussy and Never Say Never Again at the cinema.
Oh, I
Both out the same year.
thought we were the same age.
No, no, I'm an old man.
So the odd story of Thunderball is that there are various people who reckon they wrote it. One of whom, Kevin, I want to say Kevin McLeod, but that's the guy.
It's Kevin McClory.
Kevin McClory somehow had the rights to,
Yes.
and decided for some reason that he wanted to make money, presumably, but I think also more than that, it was a dream for him. He wanted to make Thunderball again after canonical Thunderball film, which is a perfectly serviceable 60s Bond film. Not one of the very best because lots of it's underwater, which isn't that filmic, I don't think. But yeah, so they do. So come the 80s, McClory's dream of making Thunderball again can happen. And his gimmick is that he's going to get Sean Connery back to do it. But as I said earlier, it doesn't make any sense because Sean Connery's already had all that stuff happen to him 20 years ago and somehow doesn't know, even though he remembers the name of the health farm, which sort of indicates that, yeah, Bond, well, he's a goldfish of sorts, but he's on this treadmill of people stealing atom bombs and people with the same name popping up. And it must be very confusing if he occasionally catches glimpses of that. But it's a very undignified film. In some ways, they make a real effort with it. I mean, they get Clement and Rene do the script, and there's the odd good line. They've got, Max von Sydow as Blofeld and things like that. They do make an effort. It's directed by the guy who made The Empire Strikes Back, so there is some talent going on in there. But at the same time, they take a thing, 60s Bond, which for all its flaws has a sort of aesthetic rightness and unity. And they decide to update that by giving him Mr. Bean as an assistant.
Oh, Johnny English.
Yeah, and all they give Rowan Atkinson is do a funny voice and fall over, which, to be fair, is quite a lot of Rowan Atkinson's act. But Sean Connery shouldn't be in the same film as Rowan Atkinson, not as Bond. And in the casino, they decide to have him play an arcade game.
Yeah.
And 1960s Bond shouldn't be aware of arcade games. It's like if he plays with a Rubik's Cube or knows about alternative comedy and stuff. It reminded me of those late Miles Davis albums where they have loads of really bad synth. They've taken this thing that is aesthetically perfect and updated it in a way that leaves it looking tawdry.
Mm.
And also appropriately for Thunderball, because it is about Bond's body, a lot of it, and its failing body. They have Connery looking really knackered. Like he's past his puff. He's clearly either hair dye or wig is being utilised. They have very undignified scenes where they make him wear kind of denim
jorts,
much like denim dungarees with nothing on underneath.
Oh no!
Which he's supposed to be a stylish man. It's not right. And he has at one point he's wearing a sort of Ernie Wise style grey beige-ish pullover thing, and gets the shit kicked out of him. And he's just writhing on the floor in his jumper, looking like your granddad or something.
Looking miserable.
Yeah, it's a cruel film, and it can't.
Doesn't he incapacitate somebody by throwing his own piss at them?
At one point, yeah. It's the whole thing is just it's taken an admittedly silly, but within its own boundaries, quite stylish and beautiful thing, and cheapened it brutally. And Connery doesn't look like he's having. He looks sad and old. The flaws in the Thunderball narrative, e.g., that it's lots of it's underwater and you can't really tell what's going on, is included. They lose a lot of the fun, the good bits with Domino, and the kind of and they make. I'm going off topic, but they managed to make the massage stuff even creepier. Because they add a new scene where Bond pretends to be Domino's masseur in order to get information from her.
Yeah,
he sneaks in and massages her and is visibly getting off on it, and is also visibly on his way towards the big 6-0. And just, it's not right. He's sort of grunting and salivating.
I think that this was such a low point in general for the Bond cinematic universe, because Never Say Never Again was very aging Sean Connery, but Roger Moore's more or less the same age, and his Octopussy the same year, and they're going head to head, and they're both, really deteriorating as physical human beings who've obviously lived fairly hard living lives when it comes to. They both need to go to shrublands and just stay there.
It is close to how even 35-year-old Bond probably would look on his lifestyle, but it's still sad to watch and yeah, cynical but also obviously quite good. I mean, if one acknowledges that it's tosh, it's quite fun to watch 60s Bond play a really bad 80s arcade game. Doesn't
he jump off a cliff on a horse as well at some?
In a remarkably racist scene, yes. Right. There's a bit where Domino is, for some reason, about to be sold to some Arab horsemen. And then Bond saves the day by wearing a headscarf and then rescuing him and then jumping with a horse. The horse survives, though, so it's all fine. But it's a folly, the whole thing, and a sad postscript to the Sean Connery as Bond era. But does sort of fit in with the novel, though, in that it's a bit of a hodgepodge and Bond is knackered and old, which is kind of the theme of the book.
Where would you put the book in terms of your reread of the Bond novels? Where would you put it in terms of? I'm not asking for a ranking necessarily, but how does it compare?
The first chunk of it is a really good comic novel, and much akin to sort of later Kingsley Amis ones like One Fat Englishman or The Old Devils or something. It's about an old soak in an unfamiliar environment, trying to deal with that. Then becomes actually sort of quite a good kind of semi-love story about a scoundrel and not as hard as she thinks she is, kept woman, which is really quite well written, interspersed with rants about food and alcohol and illness, really, and then quite a boring bit. So to summarize, it's mad, really. I like it.
It's funny that the boring bit is the bit where 2 nuclear weapons might blow up.
Yeah, I feel like whoever wrote that bit is the heart isn't really in that. I think Fleming was interested in alcohol and coffee and cigarettes at this point, and wanted to write about that. And I don't think his heart was in the end of the world stuff, really. It's the end of the world was what was happening to he/Bond's body at that moment.
Liver and heart, etc.
So it's it's not akin to the early ones where there's a pretense of being conventional spy novel, and it doesn't have the sort of innocence or the real. There's a sort of hard-boiled quality which isn't there in this, but it's replaced by something possibly slightly more disturbing, because it's not just an affectation of hard-boiledness. Bond is actually quite unpleasant at times, and quite possibly he's about to die.
I think also there's a sense of whereas the first book, had this overwhelming shadow of the Second World War hanging, affecting all the characters. As we go on, and this is like the 9th, the 8th, that the Second World War is kind of being forgotten, even as Fleming sort of tries to recall former glories. So, the underwater inspection of the hull of the boat, and they're very much inspired by the antics of a war diver during the Second World War, who Fleming knew, called Buster Crab, nicknamed Buster Crab. I should wasn't just coincidental that he and the Flash Gordon actor shared the same name.
Blofeld was one of Fleming's schoolmates, I believe.
And the son of Blofeld was Henry Blofeld, the cricket commentator.
Yeah.
So there you go. So if you've ever listened to Test Match Special,
it's the small world.
Yeah. Listen, Rob.
There is more though, because
okay,
there's having got to the confusing water fight, where I, for one, both and including in the films and in the book, check out a little bit. We get, I think, a moment of redemption for Bond at the end. So he's in hospital. Domino has proved herself to be much more effective and a much better person, really, than him.
Yes.
And we also get, I don't know whether it's a slight apology on Fleming's point, but we get a nice Jewish doctor.
Yes, that's true.
And I think on some level, understated level, it's showing that perhaps Bond did become a bit more of a Guardian reader.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that as that was definitely an interesting point, and I love the sort of final scene of Bond curling up and going to sleep basically on the floor. Domino's kind of protecting him. It's
a bit Mr. Rochester, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
He's not at all being the alpha male here. He wants a cuddle, basically.
Which I would argue is much more typical of the literary Bond than is normally admitted. I think that's much more what he's. I'm totally holding by the idea of his puppy love affection for all women. It's like, I think whenever he sees a woman, he just sees scrambled eggs.
But he doesn't also go around just saying bitch at random.
Yeah, the lady doth protest too much once.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on forever about what the hell's actually going on in his head.
It's Jackie Collins. He's using it in the Jackie Collins sense of.
But in this case, yeah, he's unmanned, isn't he? He's been beaten up, injured. His diet has been all over the place. God knows what's on his bowels. And he's very aware, I think, in as much as he's ever aware of anything, that he's been a bit of a shit.
Yeah.
And she sort of forgives him and looks after him. And I think we are supposed to learn some.
I think we learn a lesson about humanity and about.
We learn that you can get away with anything.
Anything, yeah. What does Royal Tenenbaum says? I think you should be able to be a bastard for the whole of your life, and then everyone forgive you right at the end.
Bond does have some kind of forgivable quality, because they're always letting him off, aren't they? They're very rarely, apart from the baddies who are a bit fascinated by him anyway.
Yeah, but they're bad losers.
Yeah, but yeah, people do tend to forgive Bond, as do we, the reader, because we keep going back to this quite tedious, egg-obsessed psychopath.
Incredibly flawed individual who's constantly getting it wrong.
Can I tell you what a very pathetic thing that I did?
Go ahead.
I found on the internet a replica of a polo shirt that Bond wears in these films, and I bought it. It just looks like a normal shirt, and yet I secretly know when I'm wearing it that I'm wearing Bond's shirt.
That is both admirable and pathetic in almost equal equal fashion.
I mean, it is quite a nice shirt. It's all right, but it's Bond's shirt.
There you go. Do you hear the music when you walk in the room? So what have we learned?
We've learned that this is the most sort of Rabelaisian of Bond books in a way. It's a Bond written by the body. It's Bakhtin, as someone would like it. It's all about the stomach and the lung and the weak flesh.
Even when Mrs. Miggins has that thing about those holes, it's like, what are you doing? Are you peeking in the while he's having a shower or something?
Oh yeah. I mean, maybe he had a nudist phase after the Elf Farm.
There is one of the films. Oh well, no, sorry, one of the books. I think Moonraker. He goes for a swim in the Nud, because there's quite often a moment where a woman will say, "But I haven't got my costume," and he'll be like, "Ah, bingo!" as he runs.
Like Inspector Clouseau films quite a lot as well.
Exactly, and Carry On films as well. But
the boundary between Bond pastiche and Bond is very, very thin.
It's also it's translucent. That's amazing. Brilliant, Rob. Absolutely wonderful talking.
More things we've learned.
Go ahead.
Well, we've learned that you can write a fairly decent novel by committee, but that underwater is, I think, a rubbish thing, both for novels and for films. It doesn't work. I don't think. Not much happens anymore, even if you've got stuff going on.
Yeah, I agree. I think he uses it. He's gone back to that well quite a bit. There's an extended underwater sequence already in Live and Let Die. It's like, okay, we get it. We like diving
on a full stomach, drunk.
Yeah,
but, like Dennis Wilson.
Absolutely.
But I think the problem is that there's so much effort is involved to make the reader imagine what it's like, assuming the reader in there. That as soon as the reader forgets to do that, they have to sort of go back and think about it again, and it's just and also I think this one, Bond is sort of more protean and unsure of himself. He's a Bond in flux. Perhaps it all basically comes down to the young generation at the start. That's what kicks him off.
Yeah, I think this is the midlife crisis Bond.
So very out of character at times. His politics shift a little bit. He worries about he's becoming a liberal. He has fad diets. And behaves uncharacteristically shifts his attitude despite the womanizing in the other books. And in this case, he actually lets his guard down and gives in to his baser self. And I think has a slight conscience about it. So we're given a little bit more insight into it. We're given a more real Bond in a way, because people aren't always one thing. And Bond isn't in this one. He's all over the place.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it is not necessarily the most successful of Bonds, but it is one of the more fascinating.
I mean, there is possibly the explanation that rather than being a conscious attempt to influx, it's written by 4 or 5 people.
No, I don't. I think you can exaggerate that. I think what happened was basically they tried to write scripts together, and then after 5 or 6 attempts, he just sat down and wrote a novel using the story as a blueprint.
Oh, so probably just I think just a bit of dialogue at the most, and some of the structure.
Exactly. Yeah, some situations and things. I don't think they sat down and went, chapter 1, what's the first word?
It feels a little bit like it might have different authors, though. As I said, I mean, there's the novel at the start, and then the weird stuff about food, and the love intrigue, and then and lots of stuff about status on the island, and kind of the life of the rich. So there's a lot going on in it for a very quite short and often silly book. It is all over the place.
Brilliant, Rob. Well, thank you very much for joining us once more, and I look forward to talking to you sometime in the future.
All right, take care.